Welcome to Coaching Uncaged by Animas, the podcast that explores the art, science, and career of coaching. And now, introducing your host and interviewer, Yannick Jacob.
Wonderful. I'm going to try to get this right. Joel Di Girolamo, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Yannick.
Joel, I hate reading bios, as many people here know, but I'm going to try to do the monumental work that you're doing justice. Because I think I say monumental, I say this consciously because I think it's really, really important that we have people like you in our profession. Because I'm coming from a research angle. I've been finding my way into coaching through evidence-based practice. And I really believe that science has so much to offer, research has so much to offer to help us understand the underpinning of coaching, why it works, the foundations. It creates better coaches when we look at coaching with a really with a strategic mind and good methods. Right. And this is very much where you operate. You're the Vice President of Research and Data Science at the ICF. So you have access to a huge amount of data, which is amazing. Must be great to be in that position. But also you come from 30 years of corporate experience. You've written 2 books, interestingly, not generally coaching related. There's a book on yoga in no time at all. And there's a book that is a story about someone in a leadership position who have facing challenges at work, but it's storytelling. But this guy talks to a professor, and so all of this theory and research is coming in, but in a storytelling way, which I loved. So you've done a lot in that space, and I'm curious, maybe as an opening question. First of all, is there anything you would want to add into that? And also, how does one get from corporate to yoga at no time at all, authoring stories to this? Maybe not to this. Maybe research has always played a role. But I'd love to know a little bit more about your journey. There seems to be something really interesting going on.
Oh my gosh, Yannick, I think that could take the whole hour. Let's start with the yoga. My grandfather died when I was about 12. And so we went through his house, and he had a lot of books. And I picked up this book, and it was on yoga. And at the time, I lived in a small town, very religious town. And I read it, and I was like, wow, this is really cool stuff. But I didn't know what my parents would think about it, or people in the town. So I squirreled it away in my bedroom, and I practiced yoga in the secret of my bedroom for many, many years until I got older. Didn't go to a class till I was like 35. But so yoga has been a part of my life for many, many years.
Wow. What made it feel so forbidden? Sorry to jump in there, but that seems curious, right? That's not marijuana in your pocket. It's like yoga. Did it seem like a thing that you wouldn't want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, it was the 60s, right? And so, yoga was just emerging in the West. And so, yeah, I wasn't sure how people would react to it. It's a really good question, Yannick, because, it's a part of our own internal stories that we tell us, right? And that was my own internal story. And if I had asked my parents, they would have said, we don't care. And I knew they didn't care afterwards, but I was afraid to ask. And so, that was a really valuable lesson for me. But the beauty of the yoga ties into coaching, because one of the elements of yoga, yoga is union or yoke, and it's this bringing together of our earthly presence with some greater presence. And I use the word presence. And presence is so important in coaching. So the lessons that I learned from being on the yoga mat were definitely brought into coaching. So that's the yoga angle.
Could you give us some examples while we're at that? What lessons have you learned about coaching from yoga? And I know this could also take the entire hour, but if you were to pick up 1, 2, or 3.
Well, it's interesting because so many people they have the little, on their phone, they have the little ding going off when they get a text message or an email. And what I have found over the years is like, when I hear that little ding, it takes me out of the state I'm in. And I've learned, and David Drake and I were having a conversation a couple months ago about this, that it pulls you out of the state that you're in. And when you're doing yoga, you are supposed to be practicing on your mat, in your body, focusing on what's happening there. And so when you hear that little ding on your phone, it's pulling you out into this superficial world where you and I are right today. And so with coaching is an immersive experience. You're in this dyad, this discussion back and forth with your client, and you're wanting them to feel safe, you're curious about them, you're wanting to learn about their goals, and you're wanting to facilitate their progress toward those goals. It's as simple as that. So the yoga, the presence, and being on the mat is brought into the coaching practice. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay. So and then the other background is I have an electrical engineering degree. That was my first degree. And then I got an MBA along the way, and then ultimately got a psychology degree. And I've always been curious.
Yeah. Hold on, I gotta jump in. I mean, there's such different ends of the spectrum: electrical engineering, psychology, and an MBA. How come you don't just pick up an MBA as part of an electrical engineering degree? How come you connect these dots?
Well, okay. So the story on that is, there's always a story, right? The story on that is, if my father had been a psychologist instead of an electrical engineer, I probably would have taken up psychology right out of the chute. But I remember my father managed an electronics plant, and he would talk about, he used the term efficiency experts on the assembly line. And they were people who watched the workers, what they would do, and they would try to make it more efficient. And I was like, ooh, that's really cool. That seems like a real challenge, I'd like to learn more about that. So I asked him, Dad, who are those guys? And he says, I don't know. So I asked my career counselor in high school, who are those guys? They answered, I don't know. So if you reach back into psychology, we get back to Taylor, or what's frequently called Taylorism, and that is about worker productivity, what workers do in their jobs. You go back to the Bell Lab stuff, the watching people work, what gets attention, gets focus, gets worked on, gets improved. Doesn't really matter always how you do it, and coaching is the same way. So ultimately, I'm like, okay, fine, I give up on that. My dad's an electrical engineer. That seems pretty cool. It was a decision between electrical engineering, nuclear engineering, or architecture. Okay, go figure. But anyway, so I said, okay, fine, I'll do the electrical engineering thing. And I was into audio at the time. And so I actually did research as an undergraduate on audio and speakers, which was fascinating to me, because many, many years later, some other guys who happened to be in Lexington, Kentucky, in the US, where I live, did very similar work and came up with some really cool speakers, teal audio, that were based on the concepts that I was studying at the time. I was like, whoa, this is pretty cool. So I got this idea about I could do research at an early time. And then when I worked at IBM out of college, we took, they forced us, highly encouraged us to take what were called design of experiments courses. And so we had to gather our data, we had to look at our data, we had to analyze our data, and come up with our conclusions. There was an instructor, his name's Marv Smoke. I can still hear his voice.
Great name.
Kept saying, yeah, he kept saying, look at your data, look at your data, look at your data. And I see that so often. So I'm an editor, an associated editor for Consulting Psychology Journal, and I see it frequently in manuscripts where people will have their data and they don't really look at their data. They just run all these statistical tests and say,
Mm-hmm.
well, the test says X.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much more richness and vibrance in
Mm-hmm.
that data if we just look at it and
Yeah.
we see what it's doing. And that's the beauty of it. And that's where I was able to bring the electrical engineering concepts, the ideas, that data-driven mentality into
Yeah.
psychology, into the research that we do today at ICU.
Yeah. I think that's really important because I've supervised a lot of research in my time at university, and I noticed it as well when I studied psychology in 2005. Started the research methods, especially research methods here in the UK. I think we don't have that proximity to the data anymore. At the time, I was really happy because our textbook was called Statistics Without Maths. And in the German psychology degrees, you do nothing but statistics for 2 years. So you really understand the data and you're very close to the data all the way through your research. And here, especially at master's level, many students at master's level, many students at coaches at master's level that don't have the undergraduate in a science related degree. They come from coaching from so many different angles. And I think that's helpful for the diversity of the profession. But the closeness to the research and the closeness to the data isn't really there anymore. You just learn how to run a statistical analysis, and then you learn how to interpret the results that are coming out of that. Can we ever go back to that in this day and age?
Well, we darn well better. And when manuscripts come across my desk as an editor, I will push back on that, and I will encourage them because that's all I can do, right? But then we can decide whether to accept or reject the publication, the manuscript. But there are analyses. I mean, this stuff is not rocket science, what we're asking people to do. Sure, to your point, it can be challenging, at times, but a lot of it's just basic foundational statistics, to your point. And we have such wonderful tools today. And from a quantitative side, we have all the classical test theory with all the correlation methods. We have IRT, item response theory, and we have the RASH model that is just so elegant and provides so much richness and insight into the data that's reasonably easy to use tools. And so when we're doing research, and there's two basic methods, qualitative and quantitative, and when you juxtapose those and you do a qualitative study that's along with a quantitative study, and then you can
maybe quickly, qualitative is when we do interviews, we look at what people actually saying. We do analysis of text of what people are telling us, and quantitative is analyze numbers, typically questionnaires, data that we get where people rate something from 1 to 7, 1 to 10, highly likely, less likely, just for the audience who's not so research affine.
Thank you, Yannick. Yeah. Sorry, I make assumptions sometimes. So the interviews and the words that people use and the concepts that they have are so rich with detail and I say vibrance because it's almost like they vibrate, and that's a whole another topic we could dwell on. And then so it's like the qualitative will let you see under the hood and let you see what's inside. And the quantitative can let you know, is it a refrigerator or is it a toaster oven? And so we can get an idea about the size of it, and some level of nuance to it, with cluster analysis and stuff like that.
Yeah, we can pick up on a theme. If we interview 7 coaches, that's meaningful data. But figuring out whether the themes that emerge from interviewing 7 coaches is actually a thing that's happened in the coaching industry. We need to interview a lot more people. And in order for that to be viable, I mean, we have to work with questionnaires, and
Right.
it's super interesting for me. And we're getting a bit technical already. I appreciate that. Maybe we roll it back in a moment. But as we're on the topic, the School of Psychology where I was trained had strong proponents of qualitative research. So I grew up academically appreciating, like being convinced that of course we need qualitative data. I mean, how could you not? I mean, otherwise you're just going to miss so many things. And there was this critical attitude towards quantitative data because by definition you're going to miss a lot, because you're forced to give a number and you can't just explain why you offered that number, and somebody's 7 means something very different than this other person's 7. So and then I kind of grew beyond my research institute and my department, and I realized, oh no, like the vast majority of science is like qualitative. Where's the numbers? How is it in the coaching industry at the moment? I mean, you have a broader overview of research. Is qualitative coming back, or is it getting the place that I would like it to have? You seem to be a fan.
Well, absolutely. I'm a fan of mixed methods. So mixed methods, for the audience, are when you do studies that involve the qualitative as well as the quantitative. And you can do your qualitative first, and frequently we do this. We'll do maybe a very small sample, to your point, maybe 6 or 7 interviews to understand what is it that we're studying. Do we have our conception of it correct? And then we might say from that, we might do a broader qualitative study with maybe 20 coaches or clients, depending on whatever we're studying. And then from that, we can go over to the quantitative side. We can develop a survey. We can test that and then deploy that out into the field and get our data, and it can come back. Now, where you can then follow on from the quantitative, you can do a follow-on qualitative study. You can say, like I just mentioned, cluster analysis. So you could find that perhaps there's a cluster of coaches that are seeing things a certain way. And you could say, we want to find some of those folks and we want to dig into that. What is that? What's that about? And so then you can do some interviews with those folks, and you can dive into that particular aspect of coaching, for example. And so that's the power of the mixed methods approach. And I just love it when I see studies that are mixed methods.
Yeah, also a great power to drive researchers mad. I chose to do a mixed method in my master's dissertation, and it's complicated, right? And that's why I have so much appreciation for the science, because I think it's still the best way of knowing things that we have available to us that we can replicate, right? Good science is done in a way. That's why it so often reads so dry, because the language is not supposed to be pretty and beautiful and engaging. It's supposed to be as clear as possible. And maybe it's the German in me who is appreciating that more than perhaps others, but good science is written up in a way that anybody in the world can pick it up and try to do the same, and then replicate it, try to do the same and get the same results. And if 10 researchers around the world with different populations, different people, different groups get similar results, then there's better knowledge. And that's a really good process. In positive psychology, there's a big replication crisis in research. And I wonder if you find the same in coaching psychology, that because often you're also an editor. I know many journals, they don't like to publish replicated studies because it's not new, it's not exciting, even though it's an essential part of science as a process. Do you find that the same in coaching psychology, this kind of replication crisis?
I was hoping you would not come up with that phrase, replication crisis. Yes, it's real. It's real, Yannick, and it is present in coaching. So I'll give you an example. Okay, let me comment on one thing first, and that is the academic writing. And the academic writing is absolutely dry as toast. And I just I have been working on a theory paper for the last 3 or 4 years, and I only get to work on it between Christmas and New Year's because that's when I don't have meetings and emails coming in all day every day. And so I said this year I'm going to finish that paper, and I did. I finished it 2 days ago, and
Hey.
and, and I I spent a lot of hours being very crisp. So crisp is one of my favorite words. Crisp and clear.
Crisp is nice, yes.
Yeah,
Much better than dry.
yeah,
Because that's what it is.
yeah. It is. So anyway, I reread it from beginning to end, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so dry. Nobody's going to want to read this, but the academics, I think, will like it, because some of the ground I have covered is there have been problems in not just the coaching research, but the therapy research.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read about, I don't know if you've heard of the term active ingredients or common factors or specific ingredients. So there's a lot of, I'm not sure what word to use around it, but it's not really thought of correctly a lot. And Bruce Wampold is one of the guys who's been very crisp about pointing out what the problems are around these terms. And I went to considerable length to go through the literature and say, here's where this came from, here's how it evolved, here's the really correct way that we need to be looking at these active ingredients of therapy or coaching. Now, let's go to the idea about the replication crisis. One of the key elements in this theory paper is around relationship. Now, this may be heresy, but my view, so replication crisis, the research that shows that relationship is related to positive outcomes in coaching is not unequivocal. Okay, there are studies that have shown it doesn't matter that much. And in the research, in this paper, I talk about that. And I believe that it's more about safety. It's about psychological safety of the client, that they're really, all they have to be is willing to open up sufficiently to state what they want to accomplish, what goals they might want to accomplish, and move forward from there.
And some people feel a lot more safe when they have a good relationship with someone, and others don't need that much relationship in order to feel safe. They just need a professional framework.
Exactly. And you look at brief therapy, you look at brief coaching, and they don't really spend any time on relationship, but yet they have positive outcomes.
Well, yeah, we had Wendy Dryden on recently on this podcast, and he mostly does single session work now. Yeah,
Peter Szabo. I had a conversation with him, I don't know, a month ago or so. We've had several conversations, and I'm like, I number one, I had to find him. He's like elusive, but I finally found him. I finally connected with him. We had just a really wonderful conversation, and this idea of presence. I'm like, Peter, okay, so what do you do? How do you develop relationship? And he said, we're doing it right now. And it's about the presence. And there's this something that's not talked about so much in the coaching literature or the research is unconditional positive regard. And to me, this is strongly related to presence. And I talk about it in the theory paper to some extent, that unconditional positive regard, I believe, does two things. Number one, it gets to this presence that I was talking about. And secondly, it gets to this safety that the client can feel. If they're not being judged, if they're unconditionally regarded positively, to your positive psychology point, they're going to open up. And so I ask myself, why are these coaches wasting all this time building relationship when they can just have at it, right?
Yeah, there's a quality of the presence because you can be very present with someone, but if you come in with that unconditional positive regard, the non-judgment, the full-on, I'm just completely with you right now, really being with someone, there's a quality to that presence. It goes well beyond giving somebody your full attention. It's giving somebody your full being and not wanting them to be any particular way. Right. And that's very, very powerful. And yeah, I think you're spot on that provides so much safety. You don't need to disclose a lot of yourself as a coach in order to build a relationship. And I think that's often a misunderstanding of what it means to have a relationship with someone. So I really like that you're making that point.
Right. So can I make one other point here, Yannick?
Sure, yeah.
So I believe, so this idea about relationship, this idea about rapport and how we have to build all this, fundamentally, it's about one concept, and that is about in-group, out-group bias. Mm-hmm. Let's take ourselves back to our ancestral homes out on the savannah, and we were in our tribes, and we were safe in our tribes. That's why we had our tribes. We were protected. And so if you were out on that savannah and you were out alone and you saw somebody approaching you, what did you need to do? You needed to very quickly decide, is that a friend or a foe? And if you misjudged and they were a foe, you could be dead in an instant, right?
And your tribe.
Yeah. We learned, and it's in our DNA, to make these snap decisions. And there's a wonderful research paper. I think the authors are Willis and Todorov. And they did research that showed we as Homo sapiens, we make a decision within 100 milliseconds whether to trust a person or not.
Yeah, and it used to be 4 seconds, right? We put someone in the category, but it's actually a lot quicker.
Right. And so all you're doing in coaching, in any relationship, you and I are doing it right now. All we're doing is we're working for each other to feel that we're in the in-group together. Fundamentally, that's all we're doing. It's very simple.
And I had that as soon as we tuned in, there was a very snap feeling, right? And chemistry calls. That makes me think like, why are some people's chemistry calls as long as 15 minutes? I mean, I meet clients for the first time. I block a lot of time. I block up to 2 hours, and I've been wondering whether I should change something about that, given that, time has become a lot more scarce. And I like to really meet someone. And I do think that sometimes you meet someone and the chemistry isn't immediately there, but you can still do amazing work together because does it change even if you made a snap decision? That whether you like someone or not, do we really have to like someone that much? But I mean, there's an argument that the chemistry call could be 5 minutes, or even 500ths of a second. No. But it can also transcend, or can it? I don't know. I'll put that in the room. What do you think?
I think it can. I mean, look what you did. You read my book, or at least you glanced through it on the leadership book, and so the yoga book. And so what you were doing at the beginning of the session is you were saying, we're in the in-group. I've read your stuff. I've studied positive psychology. I think we're on the same wavelength. Let's chat. And fundamentally, I believe that we as humans, as citizens of this planet, we need to do more of that on a global scale. We need to have more dialogue, talk about more of the commonalities, because I believe fundamentally every human on the planet wants the same stuff.
So everybody's in group, really.
Yeah. So let's start getting everybody on the planet in the same in group.
Oh, we need aliens, proof of them. So we have a proper out group, not just to believe in them.
I like that. I like your style, Yannick.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a very serious issue, right? Because we have this natural tendency to create in and out groups because we need a sense of belonging, and that comes from an in-group, that comes from a tribe. And nowadays, we're so globally connected that I totally believe in, yes, we are all part of the same in-group, but we have this natural tendency to and need even to create in-groups and out-groups for the sake of our identity. So, that's where you find people who should be a tribe, like coaches, and then they fight amongst themselves. All of a sudden they say, oh no, I'm a cognitive behavioral coach, and I'm an existential coach, and I'm a goal-focused coach, I'm a solution-focused coach, I'm a person-centered coach. And then, that they're all these different groups. I'm an evidence-based coach. And then I'm like, oh yeah, but like, then there's people who are evidence-based and other people who believe that, evidence-based doesn't really mean anything anymore. So I don't know what the question in there is.
Well, there's a lot in there, and going back to the first thing, people, there's an identity, and that's why when we go through our teenage years and early 20s, they've shown the brain is very malleable, very plastic, and when we're teenagers, we want to create our own self-identity. Mm-hmm. And so when we rebel, that's what we're doing. We're just trying to create our own identity. We're just screaming to get it out, right? and so, and then that continues. And so people like to put fear into us because fear is the strongest motivator. And so by casting individuals as an out group, they can bring in the element of fear, and they can control people better. And so we see that history is replete with examples of that, right?
I'd love to jump in there because here's a really, really important point. And I see it day in and day out in my supervision practice or training coaches struggling to find that sense of identity because there's so many voices out there, starting with people's training or books that they read or gurus that they follow on social media about this is how you do coaching. No, this is how you do coaching. No, how could you do this? This is how you do it correct. And then the research angle is important, but also that's where I have a bit of an issue with it, right? Because research works best when it's very well defined what we're trying to measure. And so coaching being notoriously difficult to define is beautiful because it offers this diversity of approaches and people's work, which makes coaching a very inclusive profession. But at the same time, I see all those coaches struggling with, well, what kind of coach am I? I need to have a very clear sense of my coaching identity. And I have this need to feel that I'm doing it right. Because if I'm doing it wrong, I might cause this damages or I might not be successful. And all of these people are telling me, this is how you do it correctly. No, this is how you do it correctly. And then there's people who are selling training on the basis of my approach is correct. You should train with me. And then there's all this fear floating around that gets coaches nervous. And the more nervous a coach is, the less present they are with their clients. So in the context of
research, effective they are.
Yes. So in the context of research, I know there's a bunch in there that you could comment on. Feel free to go wherever you want with this question. But I guess the main focus I have here is given that research works best when it's well defined, and given that coaching is so difficult to define, sometimes I ask myself, what's the purpose of research? I mean, I have an answer to that, but I wanted to put it to you to see how you might respond to that.
Well, I'll be interested in your answer. And there are several concepts in there, to your point. Okay, so in college, I also studied Eastern philosophy. And one of those Eastern philosophies is Taoism, Tao. And the beauty of Taoism, the philosophy, not the religion, but the beauty of the Taoist philosophy is it doesn't matter. The beginning of the Tao Te Ching is the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. So in other words, if you name it, that's not it.
Yeah.
Right?
Difficult to wrap your head around that.
So it's the same with coaching. And so it's this nebulous, the world is nebulous, okay? But it's this nebulous thing. And so when a coach can become experienced enough and mature enough that they don't need that identity of I'm an existential coach, I'm a Gestalt coach, I'm a whatever kind of coach. And in Taoism they talk about the empty vessel.
Mm-hmm.
How can I become the empty vessel? And now we're coming back to presence.
Mm-hmm.
And that I'm just present for the client. I'm going to give you an example. There's a lady that I know very well who lives in town here in Lexington, Kentucky. And I did some energy work with a group of people. That's a whole nother story. A guy from Yugoslavia. And there were several of us in town who worked with this. We would once a week have a group. We would meet. We would discuss what we were doing with it. And so I knew this lady who was a coach. In fact, she's the one who got me this job. But that's, again, another story. But I went back to interview her on one of our research projects. And I said, well, I know, we started the interview, and I said, well, I know you use these techniques, blah, 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 and I'd like to talk to you about that. And she said to me, she says, Joel, I don't do any of that stuff anymore. I'm like, you don't? What do you do? She said, I just listen to people.
Yeah.
And that was a real inflection point for me.
Mm.
And again, it's coming back to this presence. It's coming back to the UPR, the unconditional positive regard, and just being there for the client. And if you listen to some of these very experienced coaches and their conversations, they're just like this weaving. And it's almost, we get back to Milton Erickson and his hypnosis. And it's like these almost hypnotic conversations that are just flowing. And none of it is programmatic. None of it is, to a point. There was one I listened to, and we talk about kind of assessing the session, or how good was this session for you. This coach 3 times in this conversation evaluated the coaching session with the client. I don't think the client even knew that it was happening.
Huh. How did they do it so that it was so woven into a conversation and not in an official, okay, let's evaluate this?
Yeah, it was like the conversation, the client said, well, yeah, I think maybe I could do some of X, whatever it was. I don't remember what it was. And they're like, oh, so is that helpful to you? Do you think that'll be helpful? And oh yeah, I really think so. That was an evaluation, right?
Yeah,
but
these little bits, I love it when that happens like that, when contracting just kind of flows and it doesn't feel like a contracting stage of a conversation, but it feels like just 2 people talking. But like little things like, could I ask you a really challenging question?
Yeah.
And it feels normal. It feels like something that somebody would say. I remember one of my coaching trainers often said, it's oh no, I lost track of thought. Interesting.
Well, can I interject one little thing in that?
Yeah, sure.
So there's a famous story about Milton Erickson, and his methods. And you read, and you read transcripts of his methods, or you watch him. And what he did was, I would call eclectic, but he was, fabulously successful at it. And there's one famous story about him and the lady with the African violets, where he went in. There was a lady who was severely depressed. He noticed that she loved African violets, and all he said to her was, he said, every time somebody in your church dies, I want you to take the family members an African violet. And that was it. That's all it took for her to get out of her depression. And was that therapy? The therapist,
It's quite directive, right? It's like edging on so many, oh no, but you're not supposed to do this. But like he tapped into something that worked.
Right. And that gets into the hook. In coaching, you're always looking for the hook. What's going to motivate the client to do the work, to want to motivate them toward the goal, especially if you have a resistant client, right? So I want to hear your answer, Yannick. You didn't give your answer. You said you had an answer.
Yeah. I have my sense for an answer, because the problem is, well, yes, there's all this just be present, and this that cannot be named. If it can be named, then it's not it. And yet in research, we're actively trying to name something and study it and take it out of the hole and study that and then try to integrate it back. And then there's so many different approaches to it. So for me, my sense of an answer is that it's never going to be possible to say this is coaching, because everybody has their own integrated way of what coaching is, by who they are as a person, how they relate to people, how they're creating space. But from each and every study, we can learn something, even if it's about a very specific kind of coaching or another coach, even if we can't replicate it, because we cannot possibly replicate what a coach does, because every coach, even if we give them the same 10 questions, 10 different coaches will ask 10 different questions, same words in a completely different way, just by how they show up in the space. So
sure,
it is flawed by that definition. All coaching research is flawed. And yet every coaching piece of research can teach you something, can inspire something in you. It makes me think about part of my coaching when I read a piece of study. When I engaged with a researcher's interpretation of the data, I can think about my own coaching approach. And while my coaching approach will by definition be different to whatever coaching has been measured as part of this study, it can make me think about my coaching, and it makes me reflect on what I do with clients. And it can help me try out some new things that I hadn't thought about before. So I moved away from this endeavor that coaching is a thing to be named and measured and framed and, seeing if it's effective or not. This kind of coaching is effective. Why? These are the themes of why this particular approach to coaching was effective. And then you need to dig quite deep into the data. But that journey is a meaningful one, even though it cannot possibly succeed to capture what coaching is and whether it's effective or not. That's how far I got with this.
Okay, so let's add on to that, and really, coaching is about facilitating clients to a shift that they want to make. And so, you read the ICF definition of coaching, you read Tony Grant's definition of coaching, and all at the heart of all of this is growth in humans.
Mm-hmm.
That's the heart of it. So, what can a coach do to help someone make that shift or to grow? In the theory paper that I've talked about, that part of the model that I wanted to create had to be generalizable to a client, to an individual working on their own without a coach to make a shift. Because that all a coach is doing is they're a facilitator. They're helping the client to get to the shift. And one of the metaphors that I use is think of in the States we call it a teeter-totter or a seesaw. I don't know what you call it in Europe, the little bar that flips over.
Oh yeah.
People are on one end. What do you call it?
Was it a whip? A Wippe it's in German.
Oh, really?
But
Okay.
they have it in the playground, right? Where one sits on the one side and the other one on the other. And then, hopefully
right.
that the kid on the other side isn't the super heavy one. So you get stuck in
up in the air, or they don't jump off and let you fall.
Yeah. We've all been there.
Yeah. So anyway, the metaphor is, here's your seesaw and you've got a block on it, and you're trying to get the client to do the work to push that block up over the edge past the tipping point. And we hear that term tipping point, right? And so fundamentally, that's all you're doing, is you're trying to help the client to push that block over the tipping point.
So where the transformation happens.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, that transformation will happen one of two ways, either slowly or quickly. And quickly, we talk about the aha moments and all that stuff. And then the slow way, we tend to call that learning, right? rather than transformational growth. But transformational growth can happen slowly as well. And so fundamentally, coaching is about helping the client to move over those tipping points.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I agree with you that it's really hard to define. It's really hard to pull together to say, well, an existential coach is doing this, a Gestalt coach is doing this. Yeah, that's fine, but those are all tools and techniques. They're all paradigms. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I'm not really interested in that. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in the conceptual, foundational elements of what makes the coaching effective. And I think I finally have found a tool to do that research. I've been wanting to do that for 8 years since I've been at ICF. And I think I have found a tool to do it. So hopefully in the next couple of years, we can get to that.
Okay. Can you tell us a bit more? I mean, first of all, those of you who are listening to this, please hop over on YouTube, find wherever you are in this conversation and enjoy the excitement on a researcher's face. Tell us a bit more what that tool entails.
Well, I can't, it's like a magician never tells their secrets, right?
Wait, this is science.
I don't know if it's going to work.
If you can't talk about it yet, that's completely fine, but it certainly got me curious.
Well, okay. I mean, let me say this. So the study, even when I was contemplating joining ICF, I'm a member of the Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychology organization. They have their annual meeting in April. And it was around that time that I had been talking to ICF about joining. It was a new position. And I'm like, oh, research, that's cool. I like to do that. Coaching, I like to do that. And so I dug in. I started to dig in. Okay, where are the foundational pieces that explain how human shift in attitude or behavior? Where are the foundational papers that talk about how that takes place? Mm-hmm. Guess what? There are none.
Huh.
There are
none. But I'm thinking about like Strict Mesurov's work, Learning is Transformation, for example. I'm sure. Thinking about a couple, like people have been writing about how that takes place, but you seem to have something else in mind that was lacking.
Mesurov talks about really all the elements around it, what happens. But what happens in here and in here that causes the shift? That's what we don't know.
Right.
And the part of the difficulty is there are contextual pieces. Okay, so psychology lesson here. We behave, what our behaviors or our attitudes are generally trait-based, what we're born with, or state-based, meaning what we've learned from experiences over our lifetime. Mm-hmm. And it's really a blend of these things. You also hear the term nature and nurture. Okay, so why do we behave the way we do, and why do we have the shifts that we have in our lives? And so the shifts we can think of as state behavior, because we had an experience, maybe we had a traumatic experience and we're like, I'm never going to do that again, right? Mm-hmm. So what in our bodies, in our brains, what causes those shifts? And I've yet to see that research. Now, so what I want to do, and I'll say this much about it, is I want to understand from the coach, what did they do? I want to understand from the client, what did they do? And in the coaching session, where we may perceive as a witness or as a coach, we may perceive a moment as the shift, the client may not see the same. And we have research on that, right? Mm-hmm. Tony Grant did a lot of really good research on that. I want to talk to both clients and coaches around those moments. And the ways that I had looked at it previously were going to be really expensive to do. because we talk about, and now we're really getting into geekdom here, but when we talk about unit of analysis, you know, you okay, my mind's going a lot of places, but the unit of analysis needs to be really small, like 1 minute, because something within a minute, a lot can happen in the coaching session.
Yeah, just the amount of processes that go on inside of us in a minute. Oh,
yeah. Okay,
the amount of confounding factors. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, get back to the 100 milliseconds, right? There's a lot of those in a minute.
Yeah. Quite a lot.
You see the problem.
Yeah.
But like I say, I think I finally found something, and I don't know if it's going to work, so I'm not going to say what it is.
Fair play. You will have to reveal your magic at some point, because that's good science. But I'm prepared to wait. Patience is definitely something that researchers need to bring with them. I want to get a lot more concrete for a moment, because we could talk about geek out for hours, but also I have our audience in mind, and I know there's so much to learn that you've already come across, not what you're thinking about doing in the future. But there's a couple of publications that you've already put out that kind of caught my eye around reflective practice, around the coaching development journey. So I wonder if you could share a couple of nuggets of what you've learned along the years, maybe something that you found really surprising, or something that resonated with coaches out there a lot. Just could you give us a couple of research nuggets that come straight out of the data that has helped you in your practice, or that have helped other coaches in their practice?
Okay, sure. So let's talk about the reflective practice paper, and it was really fascinating to me because in the world of psychology, frequently we will work off of our own experience, right? And so I got to thinking about, well, how is it that I make shifts, or talk to other people, and how do we make shifts? Because fundamentally, that's what it's about. So I got to thinking, well, for me, I sit and I reflect back, and let's say I had a meeting with somebody. I was in a meeting at my organization, and things went south, as we would say in the States, and somebody started yelling at somebody. Then I started yelling, and it got really bad after that, and I acted out horribly, and I don't ever want to do that again. So what did I do? First, I reflected what happened, and then I was like, secondly, I began to be aware of my emotions and my behaviors. So that was the awareness piece. Some people talk about self-reflection, then they talk about self-awareness, but it's not necessarily always self. But okay, so the second thing was awareness, and then the third thing was regulation, and here it is self, because it is self-regulation. I'm regulating myself, because I can't regulate you, Yannick. I can only regulate myself.
Yeah, you try.
Yeah, you try. You will do it this way.
Respect my authority.
I'm half German, so I can say that.
Appreciate that. Yeah. So reflection, awareness, regulation.
Right. And so I started thinking about this, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. And I started talking about with Alicia Hollinger and Thomas Ketch, fellow members of the academic research team at the time, and I'm like, well, okay, somebody surely came up with this model 20 years ago, 40 years ago. No, it wasn't there. There's a lady, Tasha Eurich. She wrote a book, and a fairly recent book, and I read it, and I was like, okay, she's got it. I'm sure she's got it. She got so close, but she didn't get there. And I'm like, okay, guys, we need to write this up. So we did, and Alicia did the vast majority of the lit review and the writing up of that paper. But we found that nobody really put together that model that way. And that's so important in coaching. And so that we ended up with, there's really 4 ways that happens: internal, inside you, and that could be in the moment, or it could be generalized. So the way I just talked about it was internal, generalized. But if I notice that happening, that I'm starting to get emotional, and I'm starting to get my voices starting to get louder in a meeting, that's in the moment. internal, and then there's external where I could be seeing you do it, maybe. So we came up with that model, and that's been pretty well accepted, and I think it's helped. And coaches can use it for their own self-development. They can use it with their clients. They don't have to get into all the nitty-gritty, techie, geeky stuff.
How would that look like? For example, let's say a coach, as part of their practice, just blocks 15 minutes after each session, maybe to take some notes. If they wanted to assign some time to use this model after a coaching session, how could they do that most effectively?
Well, I mean, I used to do exactly what you're talking about. I would take my notes, and I would reflect back, okay, what happened in this conversation? And then I would ask myself, what were the most salient parts of the conversation? What did I see in the client? And then what did I see in myself as a coach that I would like to improve? So that's the awareness piece. And then the self-regulation is basically, what can I do to maybe coach the person better in the next session? What could I do? What might motivate them more? Or is it, this is really not doesn't seem to be a good fit, so I might want to be asking questions at the beginning of the next session. And then, what did I do? How would I evaluate myself as a coach? And to the self-regulation point, how could I do better next time? And then you can do it with your clients. Again, we get to this experienced thing with the clients, and we don't have to tell them what the model is. So, it's like, oh, wow. Well, when you think back on that, what did you see? Can you tell me about that? That's the curiosity thing. That's the openness element, and wow, well, did that bother you at all? Or, what's that like? That must have been, I don't know. And now they're telling you the awareness piece. And then it's like, wow, well, what do you think about this? And then get to how they might want to behave in the future.
Yeah. And this is something I value so highly about the research, that it produces these models that you can put on the table for coaches to engage with, try out. I always feel a bit clunky, but when they are internalized, they come out with this flowing conversation that just feels like a natural curiosity. And often coaches aren't really aware of where the curiosity came from. And only on reflection is like, oh, I remember my first session where I came out of it and then I reflected on it and I realized, oh my God, this was textbook grow. This was even linear, and it didn't feel like that at all because the grow model had been internalized and the curiosities just came out. And it's the same with even very complex models. It allows us to be curious about things. And once they're internalized, it just feels natural. So I'd encourage every coach to just engage with some stuff and let it feel clunky and have a cheat sheet and try it out with some practice clients or some peer coaching, and just try out coaching based on some models. And some of that will internalize and it will stick and it will feel natural and you won't even see the model behind it anymore.
Right. Absolutely. So Yannick, you've hit on a model that I've used. I've not published it, but I've presented it at many conferences and discussion. But imagine an inverted U curve, and we see a lot of these in psychology. And so imagine the x-axis being time and the y-axis being cognitive behaviors. So you're starting out, you're at the bottom of the U curve, and you're learning techniques and tools. You're learning the grow model, you're learning some other model, and you're moving up in the cognitive behaviors. And Carol Kaufman has some research. She talks about, what does she call it now? I think it's like model agility. And it's being able to jump from model to model. And so when you're at the height of this curve, you're doing all these cognitive behaviors. It's like, which model should I choose? for this instance to help the client. Well, if you dig into the expertise literature, Erickson and so forth, you'll notice that all of the experts embody whatever it is that they do. And it's just absolutely fascinating. There's a Hungarian archer that had this fabulous video of how he would ride on horseback, shoot at these targets, and like hit very near the bullseye every single time. It's gone now. I don't know what happened to it. But anyway, they're down the backside of this curve. They're not doing, to your point, you're not doing cognitive behavior.
They're not thinking about it.
Exactly. It's just in you. It just emerges spontaneously, organically. And that's what you see in very experienced coaching.
Yeah, but the hours of practice that have gone into getting to that level. And some time ago, I started thinking, I saw this freestyle rapper who's just so in the flow of things. He absolutely blew my mind. Harry Mack is his name. If anybody's got an appreciation for hip hop, that's wow. Just so much better than anybody else had ever seen in these 2 decades, more even. So I started thinking, well, I saw this video where he practices. He's giving people an insight into his training routine. And I'm like, how do coaches practice and train? I don't really do that so much anymore. When I train, it's the performance. It's much easier to practice rhymes. It's harder to practice coaching skills, but you can still practice them. So I think what research does is highlight these elements, these common factors of what makes coaching good coaching and what makes it effective. And then we can think about, okay, so how do we take these common factors and practice them?
Right.
So I guess the question there is, what are some of those common factors that maybe some that we can practice? Maybe you've come across something, but even if just highlighting the factors so that coaches can say, oh, this kind of stuff seems to be really important. Maybe I can get better at this somehow.
Wow. Well, it's interesting because when I started at ICF and I started asking some of my PSYOP colleagues, hey, what would you like to see research on in coaching from us? And one of the answers I got back was, which tools and techniques are most effective? Mm-hmm. And that really got me to thinking, okay, which tools and techniques are most effective? And the answer that I ultimately came up with was the tool or technique that is most appropriate to give the client to help them facilitate toward the biggest shift that they can make in that moment is the most effective tool or technique.
I figured you would say something like that. Yeah. And it makes so much sense, right? It seems confusing, but it is so intuitive very often. But how can coaches learn to be, presence is something that came up very strongly, right? Giving the kind of presence, creating the space where clients feel safe. But how can coaches train their intuition so that the right tool will become available to them, the right question will become available to them in that moment?
So the kind of yoga that I practice is what's called Ashtanga.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very rigorous practice. And the creator of it, Patabi Joyce, has a saying that you see a lot. And the saying is, practice and it will come. And that's really it. And so now this is getting to the second piece of research that you mentioned a little while ago about the coach's journey. Mm-hmm. And what we found that was a consistent theme, so that was a qualitative study, and what we found that was a consistent theme amongst coaches is that they were lifelong learners. And so what can coaches do to get to that point that they're down that backside of that curve? Is they're constantly learning. You will hear that coaches were constantly learning new tools and techniques, learning new paradigms, new thoughts about what causes shift in people. And they can be crazy things, right? But we can frequently learn from these things, and we experience them, we embody them. And so just staying in that empty vessel, perpetual student mode is really, really important for coaches. And it's like when we're doing study on supervision right now. And, supervision is helpful for every coach, no matter how experienced they are. Because even as a coach gets more and more experience, they can learn about different paradigms from their supervisor. They can learn about different ideas of, we're all growing in different ways. And so that all comes in to them. And they can learn together. It's just this valuable, rich exploration together, supervision is. And so never stop learning. Never stop learning. So one of the exercises that I have for one of my classes, I teach some adult education classes at a local university. And one of the exercises that I use occasionally is that you have 6 months to live. What will you do? And one of the questions that I will ask the students after they've reflected on that question for a while is, when will you stop learning? And for me, that was just a really powerful question. If I had 6 months to live, would I say, okay, I'm not going to learn anymore? I don't know. But isn't that a fascinating question?
That is a fascinating. When will you stop learning? I can't. It's difficult for me to consider the question, because how could I stop learning? I mean, I could maybe stop being actively curious about things. But then also, my top strength is curiosity and interest in the world. So for me, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to imagine yourself without the character strength. So yeah, I don't think that's the question for me. I think it's a valuable question, though.
Yeah. So anyway, that theme we saw, and it just fits in with that model that I talked about, coming down the backside of that curve. And incidentally, I came up with that model, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. I never knew what to do with it, but I would doodle things out and just kind of tuck them away somewhere. And where that's come in handy as well is with the idea of artificial intelligence coaching. And so what I can do is I can use that curve, and I show that the AI coaching will be at the beginning of that curve. And that's where the AI coaching is effective.
I know we're aimed for an hour, but I do have that question in my list. And about a minute ago, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to open that box. But since you've just opened that box, would you mind if we spend a little bit more time there?
Sure, let's go there.
Yeah, because I've been fascinated by that, because the speed of development in AI is nauseating and exciting at the same time. So hearing someone who's clearly looked into this a fair degree to see where the value of that is, I think it's really important that we talk about that, because I know a lot of coaches, they're concerned about, oh, will I be out of a job? And then initially I was like, AI coaching will never, ever replace any human relationship. But then I've had a conversation with an AI, and it took me about a minute to figure out I'm talking to one. It was Google who called me to verify my opening times of my business. And it took me a minute to realize that I'm talking to a computer. So I'm like, if I can think for a minute right now that I'm talking to a person, in 10, 20 years' time, it's going to take, a lot of people will not be able to figure that out anymore. So a mediocre coach might be replaced by an AI coach at that point, maybe. Or maybe a beginner coach might be replaced, like following a model. And a good AI will probably follow a grow model process better than somebody who's just got into coaching and not particularly feels clunky with human relationships. So I wonder, you already mentioned a place where AI coaching can really come in handy, but how do you see this evolving, and will it ever be a threat to coaches or the profession?
Well, I don't view it as a threat. I view it as an adjunct or a complement to human coaching. And I'll give you the example. I use this example frequently. My father, I mentioned, he was also an electrical engineer. And, it was fascinating because I went home from school, on a break, And I asked my dad, what all did you learn in electrical engineering school? And he told me. And I compared that to what I was learning, and I learned in 2 years what he learned in 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wasn't twice as smart as my dad. If anything, it was the other way around. But at any rate, the idea was that I learned maybe twice as much as he did, but that was, I believe, what we call schemas. So schemas are models, and we accrete these schemas over our lifetime. So I can remember a question I had on when I was in school, primary school. I'm sure it was an IQ test, but one of the things was a car is going around a corner. Which way will the car move if it slips? And of course, it's to the outside of the curve. Well, that was a schema that I knew as a child. But somebody maybe who lived on some savannah somewhere wouldn't know that schema. Mm-hmm. So my view is, and there's what's called the Flynn effect on IQ, which is IQ's increasing. My view is that our intelligence is not really increasing, but we could go there on the fluid, crystallized intelligence, blah, blah, blah. We're not going there. Mm-hmm. But at any rate, we accrete more schemas more quickly now as humans than we used to. And that helps us to move all of this forward more. Okay, so already the AI coaching is pretty effective. Nikki Turblanche and some other folks have a really good paper out there where they have compared human coaching and AI coaching, and at a basic model-based level, the AI coaching was just as good as the human coaching. Now, why did I just tell the story that I did? Because what that means is that we, as Homo sapiens, as human coaches, we will have to learn more of this stuff early on. We'll have to start at a higher level. Mm-hmm. That's just the way the world works. Mm-hmm. That's the way the universe works. And so I had to learn as an electrical engineer. I had to learn more stuff at an earlier age than my father did. Mm-hmm. And I did it. It's fine. I all lived. I survived. I made a living at it. And coaches can continue to make a living at it too. And the profession will evolve. It will change.
Yeah.
And so, at ICF, what we've done is we gathered a group of developers. We have some AI coaching guidelines that are meant to help AI coaching developers to think about the issues that might come up in their platform. Mm-hmm. And that's been helpful to the industry already. We're working to turn that into a standard. And again, this is helping to move the industry or the profession forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really like the view of AI as an asset, not just as a way to scale coaching, to make it accessible to more people at a much lower cost, but also as an asset to a human coach who can use some of that to up-level their coaching. So I think that's really important. And also, given that we've talked about presence so much, I can't see an AI offering the same kind of presence that a fellow human being does in front of you. Just the nuances of human connection. I can't see it ever being anywhere close to that.
Right. Fundamentally, we're mammals, right?
Huh.
And so we want that. We want that human connection.
Yeah.
And to your point, there was one of the AI coaching platforms that I was able to get into a loop, and like you, it's like we kind of know too much, right? And we can not know how to, but we can guess ways to confuse them.
Hey, a very last question. You can make this a short answer, possibly. I do need to give a nod to our colleague Eric DeHaan, who recently published What Works in Executive Coaching, a lot of research into common factors. But it all seems to be in executive and organizational coaching. And I wonder when, if ever, can the research catch up, or to what extent does it have already caught up with looking at life coaching And does it even matter? Is it really different whether coaching takes place in organizations or in a live coaching setting?
Well, first off, I want to mention that I really regard Eric's work very highly. He's done a fabulous job for the coaching research community, and it doesn't matter. Coaching is coaching.
Right.
Foundationally, it's all the same stuff.
Good. Well, then I want to respect your time. Thank you so much for making the time, Joel. That's been really good to talk to you. And I mean, when you talk to a researcher that you don't know and they're leading up a research department, you don't expect the kind of lighthearted human connection with lots of Eastern philosophy in it. So I really, really appreciated the conversation. Thank you. Anything else you want to offer to the coaching community? Anything you want to say to coaches out there? Any way you want to point coaches to either get closer into your sphere or something that coaches should be aware of?
I don't know about any of that. I just want to say, express my gratitude to all the coaches, to all the coaching researchers out there. That fundamentally, it's about human growth. It's about, human potential. And, a lot of the coaching profession grew out of the human potential movement in the United States. And I'm very grateful for what coaches are doing for our society, on a global level. And I just am very grateful and appreciative for the work that they do and the diligence they have in helping people grow. It's phenomenal. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yannick. I really enjoyed it. It was delightful chatting with you today.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. To watch these episodes on video, make sure you also check out youtube.com/animascoaching. See you back here soon.